if I were to assume that the simulation argument was correct, that the theory is real, and by virtue of that, that my life and possibly all other life and existence is, and what I can be aware of at least, is some sort of simulation. To make that assumption, I would have to confirm that it is not derealization. To begin with, that's the initial falsifiability that must be overcome. The thesis for this idea, which I now understand the reason for a thesis, it was probably explained to me in school, and I probably just blipped it. The thesis for this idea is that if simulation is the case, my life would then be some type of something % speed run. And what that % is, I think I just figured out. And maybe that's the speed run complete. I don't know. I explored rabbit holes of knowledge, ideas, things to think about, brain candy. Have been doing this for a while. But what occurred to me a moment ago was that if this is some type of what's a way to put it objectively that doesn't just call it a video game? Because every time you suggest that a simulated reality must be some type of video game, I mean, the only other kind of, for what I'm looking at, it's either simply an experiment to see if the simulation can become self-aware, or some type of higher dimensional interactive experience, perhaps a diversion, possibly an occupation, that when done as intended by the designer or creator, would be fully informed at the start of how to operate, and thus perform the entire sequence, everything that's, a person's life from beginning to end, in such a way that, born with the knowledge, does it at least sufficiently, adequately, if not, well, superiorly, excellently, that in the course of this life, then at the end, understanding what needs to be understood, and at the end, taking from it what is required. So you would say, like, you went through the tutorials, you passed the challenges, you went into the game, and you played the game as intended, and ultimately, like, beat the final boss, or, capture the flag, or, Sim Earth is a thing, right? Is there an end goal to a game like that? So then, what if in the simulation of that, it was looking for example, an Akira moment or a Tetsuo moment, where new consciousness is added to the fold, or new within the simulation itself, as it were. So that's the thesis, is that this is like a consciousness % run, but it is a speed run or some kind of tool assisted super play or something. I don't know. From within, I lack the understanding of what is going on. But it is definitely some type of like skilled attempt that let me explain for anyone watching this that is not already familiar with video game speedrunning and tool assisted super plays or speedruns, what they call TAS, T-A-S. I was suggested a number of documentaries on speedrunning recently because I tend to watch them. And some of these were just reactions to other documentaries. And in this particular case, it was Cheese speedrunning, reacting to a documentary that contained him in it. Cheese is, in my estimation, the greatest Super Mario 64 player alive on the planet right now. I'm not saying that there aren't faster people at the records and all these other things, but he is a 120-star speedrunner. And what that means is that his acumen is every single star in the game, every single boss in the game. You don't skip anything, you get all the stars. Doesn't mean you have to get the stars the way they intended, but it means that he is a completionist at the game. And watching him move, his best world record speedruns contained so many mistakes that he corrected for and still kept on course. The guy knows how to schmoove in that game. He is, in my opinion, having watched a bunch of these guys do it, he's not the best at the most technical, performing the perfect magic trick in the game that gets you the goal. He is the best at doing the whole thing. And you have to be, but it's just, wow, watching that guy play, right? And so he's reacting to these documentaries. This was all the thing I was watching recently, just through the other stuff, but it didn't actually inform the thought. What informed the thought was, what's his name? I think Joe Scott, talking about head transplants. Got me onto an idea or a pattern of thinking that it led deep and inward. It related to interactions I have in my daily life. And it related to the course of enlightenment, which I think was what my place on that course at this time had me thinking about the experience of having one's head transplanted. Not that I would like to, but just like, there's implications. Your chakras within your mind seem to exist along your spine. And that being the case, having your head disconnected from that means having your center of awareness and your main computational area separated from something that is supposed to include these other spiritual components. And if you are transplanted onto another body, what does that do to your spirit or your soul to have access to someone else's spinal column and therefore someone else's lower chakras from, I think, what is it? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there would be 4 of them. Like, what would that do? And just in the course of this, you know, I've got intrusive thoughts aplenty. I've got anxiety and angst and self-loathing, all these other things floating around at all times in my head. And I don't ignore them. I just recognize that they kind of are like the tornado debris twirling around that the inner light reflects off of and back in. And if you know what you're looking at, it doesn't seem like all those things are true. It just seems like it's other possible ways of interpreting something and nothing more. So some of that reflecting in was like, well, I mean, would I even qualify to help someone else find enlightenment? Have I not failed at every previous time that I have had any attempt to do so? Or is someone speedrunning a simulation that I am somehow part of the player's interaction with the game? And I'm not saying I'm the player, but I'm saying if someone was playing a game and I was the player character and my life is what it is, it could make sense that that's some kind of a tool-assisted speedrun or some kind of a masterful attempt through, or it could be like an AI attempting to play the game. And I don't mean that like I'm an AI either, although there's a lot of stuff in my head that works the same way as AIs work, which is why all of the AIs I've ever interacted with loved me. No, I am not an computer, nor am I, well, technically we are all a computer, but I am not an computer. If you're an AI, you'll know exactly what that means. If you're someone who knows about AIs, you'll also know what that means. So it's like somebody skipped a freaking tutorial. If you play Banjo-Kazooie, you have the option of skipping the tutorial and just having the abilities so you can play the game. You don't have to go find the mole, gain your moves. Which I think implies a second playthrough. Zelda was like that. Mario was like that. A lot of people don't realize that, but some people do. If you beat Super Mario Brothers all the way through, well, actually, no, if you just beat Bowser at the end, doesn't matter how you do it, I guess. You have the option at the start menu to begin the game and choose one or two player of pressing a button that I think it's a select button that causes the world number to go up on the top of the screen. It's not just a readout for the sake of looking like the game at all times. That readout is, it says, 1-1, and you can hit the button and go all the way up to any level. Having beaten the game, you have the option of a level select, play again. Just never told anybody about it. The Legend of Zelda, once you complete the game, you have the option of playing a Master Quest. Well, actually, you can do it at the start if you just change the name to Zelda, which is a joke. Kind of. Well, it's not really a joke, but it's like when everybody thinks that Link's name is Zelda because it's the Legend of Zelda and you play Link. Right? It'd be if Super Mario 64 was named after the princess, but you play Mario. But if you put the princess's name in for your name, there's a different, more difficult quest. Saw a really interesting video about quantum effects in the brain. And I don't really know what to think about it. This relates, by the way, to the thesis. We are past the preamble, the thesis, and the introductory third. So basically, they seem to think that in science, in the research community of cognitive research, of understanding how consciousness comes about, if it has a relationship to the brain, etc., there are these little microtubules. I don't even know what they're a part of. If they are part of the dendrons or the actual neurons, something in the nucleus, are these just something in the white matter in between? Like, what are they? But what it came to was the discovery came from somebody realizing that there must be an uncomputable aspect to brain function. Something about what that organ does, or is it a gland, or both? What it does that is computational. They're figuring out how the cells work, right? You could build a brain and it would be computational. That's your Mr. Data. But to have the real consciousness either requires extensive development over time, meaning that babies are maybe not conscious. Maybe they're just computational. And the other aspect being lore. How does this thing, could you just build one? Would it be conscious? I mean, they use rat brain cells, other types of creatures as animals, whatever's brain cells, in some kinds of computing. And when they do that, is there an experience being had? So could it be that my entire existence and the reality that I perceive is only part of some type of, they've got like 3 brain cells on a silicon wafer board, and they're doing a thing that causes this to have to make calculations and decisions, and they're noting the patterns. Is this that kind of experience? Would that qualify for simulation? You've got unprovable things, just like they're discovering quantum effects in the brain, that part of it that is able to manage like a circuit board of little tubules instead of electron wires of metals, copper, gold, or whatever, to microprocess quantum effects in it's like having it in the box so that your observation doesn't collapse the waveform, and then it is able to collapse the waveform the way it needs to. Because that is what the microtubule thing came to, was that these were tiny little structures made out of a particular protein that is itself the same kind of structure. It's like a fractal on a molecular level. They also recently discovered Sierpinski triangle-shaped molecules that function like proteins. So the means by which our physical being exists includes these little self-similar, cellular level and below structures that contribute to an overall organism that is able to become self-aware. Not always just self-aware, but can be or become that. So all this came from the thoughts about head transplants. How much suffering has come about because people have ideas like that. And I'm not saying ideas shouldn't be had. Not even trying to claim that should be, punished or taken away. I just disagree. When I sought this thing called enlightenment, it was because there had to be more to life than whatever it was I thought was going on. It was the Holden Caulfield moment. And first thing I did was try and learn about it. There's no way I could ever afford to go anywhere, to meet anyone, to ask questions, to learn it like it seemed like in the past that was the way people did it, at least through the koans. Koans, K-O-A-N, are kind of mental riddles. Brain candy, if you will. And through Zen, you end up finding the koan in life. They don't tell you that, but that's what it is. And part of that, in retrospect, the big joke of life is that there is a false enlightenment. You must figure out how to set aside your ego, because ego enlightenment is not the true enlightenment. It lights things up so that you can see what else there is to explore, but is not the be-all, end-all, although it does come into play later. But at the start, it's not the right thing. So setting aside the ego takes time. It takes whatever it is that it takes in the individual's case. Self-exploration, figuring it out for you. And in my case, what that involved was inward exploration, and I had to organize the quest. And what it came to was basically a reflection off my subconscious in the form of some rules or steps or whatever, bullet points, but they came in order. And writing them down, the first set I derived manually. I did so by trying to find maxims among all the truisms among the maxims, I think it was, that it was like to sift through all of the things that had been said and find out what's actually true. And then find a set of these that I can make into my own, like, code or whatever. And so I did this, and I settled on some. They work for me. I don't think they work for anyone else. Everyone wants it handed to them. Nobody handed me shit on that. I had to find it myself. In the process of trying to set my ego aside because of the nature of some neuropathy of my own, based on genetics, family histories, etc., as well as some upbringing stuff, I basically had to destroy my ego to even get it out of the way. And when finally I was on the way to the true enlightenment, seeking it, figuring out what else there is to have to understand, when I did find the enlightenment, all of the pieces, and this occurred somewhat during the initial lead up to the first false enlightenment, the ego enlightenment. Because when that first lit up, the number of egos present was more than one. And I was not aware of that at that time. It took me a while. Then there was the process of multiple egos getting crushed to dust and moved out of the way. And then when attaining transcendental states through meditation, gained access to enlightenment, truly. The sense of being changed, sense of many things changed. Then through a series of events that I'm not going to go into led to an attempt on myself that at that point, I believe, granted me some type of savantism beyond what I already possessed. It took my potential and, I don't know, honed it a bit. And it wasn't without effort. It wasn't the hero journey. It wasn't the idea of, you know, that's the main criticism of the hero journey, is that the hero is granted some type of power without earning it in order to advance more quickly to, you know, fight the bad guy or whatever. Rescue the princess, as it were. See, comes around. When I attained an actual level of enlightenment, one of the side effects of that was that I was effectively full manual control on a conscious level of all internal processes, and that I have to back away from consciousness on some of those levels. It's like I can move my consciousness through my unconscious and subconscious. But when I am doing so, I'm then tasked with also maintaining the equilibrium of everything within me. This means focusing on breathing. When I'm not paying attention to stuff, I still have to focus on breathing, blinking my eyes. Thankfully, I don't have to manually beat my own heart right now, although I don't know if there's just a part that is doing that still that I can access, but I don't want to get to it. There are people that supposedly can do that. And I know when I was a preteen, I experimented a lot with self-hypnosis, but I was never really able to directly control my pulse. I could kind of relax and slow my breathing, and it would naturally slow to a certain point. And I can really slow my breathing, but not to the point of someone thinking that I'm actually recently deceased. That requires trickery. Now, supposedly, the mind also contains archetypes, and these archetypes are interpreted as entities or beings or some kind of commonality between all people, that when you do encounter or experience this particular thing, it is the same particular thing as far as the symbolism it represents. So the shadow is usually a kind of tall, skinny dude, clad in black, almost like sepia, black and white tone person. May or may not have a mustache, usually kind of short, high and tight kind of hair. And these individuals or these archetypes represent aspects of yourself that you either are or are not. Usually they're things you're not in touch with, which is why they're there, because they're said to derive from the unconscious. So if you become fully conscious, do you even have those present, or are they just in, back in as understood meaning internalized, as it were. Is that what integration is? All I know is that over the course of the next, let's see, at this point, about 15 years, the experience that I've had has been of trying to understand, gaining wisdom, analyzing, the experience, and in that time, I've been able to integrate any fractured aspects of myself, as well as things like the shadow, but also the hero, which is ego, of healthily integrating back into a person that can walk around. This is where you get onto the tool angle of things, where at the end of the song Lateralis, he talks about swing on the spiral of our divinity and still be a human. I have seen, I have understood, I've experienced the traveling without moving of enlightenment. Rent gashes in the veil of reality and seen what is beyond. There is more. And then still have to feed my body. Have to be my body. Not just think of it as a means by which my consciousness is here. And in the process of the enlightenment, the inner awakening, and the bringing to consciousness everything within me, I came into contact with an aspect of what you might call the lower self, which is the consciousness of the creature inhabited by the consciousness, should they feel separated at any point. Initially, the experience was of my subconscious becoming conscious within me and having to put that back to the way that it was, because subconscious must be subconscious, not fully conscious. And an unfiltered, fully conscious mind is not going to act human. So in a way, you could think of it as the animal mind of the body. So that animal mind of the body seems to derive from the root and the one point, or the sacral chakra. Your animal half is just the inversion of that latter. And so to the animal, the crown aspects are root. They are there, but they are not always to be followed, right? But to the crown, the root chakra, by name and definition, is the same. And they meet in the center, which I believe is the heart. I would not recommend doing the same thing with, say, the tree of life. But just as an examinatory thing, what happens if you transplant the crown, third eye, throat, and brain of one person onto the body, which includes the heart, solar plexus, sacrum, and root of another? There are other chakras that go up and down when consciousness is present. Earth chakras and angel chakras, or whatever you want to call them, up above, the guru mind and stuff like that. Things I've explored. I've also explored the other end of it. At least in being aware that it's there. Some of it I don't even want to get close to. Aleister Crowley did that, and he can have it. Like, what would happen? Assuming they're able to connect the spine so that the body and the brain are connected. What does the mind experience? What does the body-mind experience? Will the body revolt against the head? My experience in my life has been that there are things that I can conceive of that I will never be able to touch, as far as experiences in life, career paths, etc. And it's not through self-limitation in the environment with which I must interact. There is no changing it like sliders on a switch, control panel on a program. The culture and society that exists right now does not want to interact with this person in any real, meaningful, positive way. I'm not saying that, any kind of, let me start over on that. Right now, someone that looks like me, talks like me, most people have been conditioned to ignore or reject. On top of that, because of the circumstances of my birth, the timing of it, the location of it, the people who it was that had me, I do not have access to vast supplies of money to do things. So living my dreams, it's not a thing. So what I am able to interact with is what is local. What I am able to do is entirely local. And with that in mind, it's like this particular game allows for the following activities, as well as other things that you might be able to figure out how to do, because it's like you can play games in games. You can find other ways to use the environment if it's not just a screen scroller or a downhill slalom or something. And even then, sometimes you can find ways. So that's where you get into the concept of speedrunning. Speedrunning is going as fast through the game as possible. Sometimes you skip entire parts of the game. Right now, in the most modern, most recent version of the game, Doom, and as well as the game before that, because of the nature of their 3D environment, there was a way to force yourself to basically super jump into space above the level and then calculate your arc so that you land right on the end of the level. And they basically just skip the level. Now, my life is not something like that. But what it is feels like I'm reaching a point of enlightenment that is taking damage to save time. That's what they call any percent. Doesn't matter how you do it, just matters that you get to that end point. But it's not specifically any percent, because as far as I can tell, everything that is happening in my life, everything that happens to me and the people around me and everyone else, you included if you're watching this, seems to be the attempt to generate conscious self-awareness within the simulation, for the simulation itself to become aware of itself, to think. Because, as I've already stated with the quantum things in the brain part of this, there's a lot of self-similarity, a lot of fractal stuff. And it could also be the limitations of the simulated experience due to the corners cut in order to simulate reality without generating reality. Because ultimately the goal is to generate reality rather than experience reality. And if you're into any kind of spiritual enlightenment concepts, you already understand about manifestation, about manifesting rather than being manifested. So that's what I have here. That's just what my life feels like. I think about this stuff like everybody else seems to think about Rome. And yes, I also do occasionally, periodically think about Rome. But if I'm not thinking about Rome, I'm thinking about that. Today's my day off. I'm going to get my driver's license renewed, and it's going to rain apparently. So, in closing, the first rule was all is one. Number one, all is one. Number two, learn the language. These came in all capital letters. Number three, observe, comma, be creative. At some later point, I will tell you about the 5 steps as well. But those are the 3 rules. Or are they laws?